Welcome to this video on critical reasoning. This is the second video of the series, and in this video I'm going to discuss the remaining question types left in critical reasoning for GMAT and CAT. So we have questions on finding the flaw, bold-faced arguments, inferences, completing the passages or the argument, and some random questions. Before we go ahead, please don't forget to visit our website at perfect-scores.com. You can even like us and support us at facebook.com/perfectscores. And in case you want to share any feedback or you have a query for us, you can drop in a mail at perfectscores89@gmail.com. So before we go ahead and start doing the questions, let's go ahead and revise what we already did in the previous video. We did parts of an argument, which are basically the conclusion, which is the main point, and the supporting premises. So the argument is basically made up of these two parts, the conclusion and the premises, and the unstated link between them is known as the assumption. Now you need to know these terms not only for critical reasoning but for your AWA as well, because these will be helpful there. Next we did format of a question. A question is usually divided into the argument, and then you have a question stem, and finally you have the 5 options in front of you. The strategy which we had already discussed in the previous video, again, you do not have to read the argument first, otherwise you will not be able to find out what are you looking for. It will be very difficult for you to come down to an option or an answer choice. What you have to do is, first you have to read the question stem. You have to find out what actually do you have to do, and then you have to go to the argument, work it out and find out all the information. The third thing is that you need to predict what your answer will do. In other words, you have to predict your answer, and when you have that prediction in front of you, you have to use the process of elimination. And remember, on your scratch work, I told you either you can just have this basic scratch work, just write down the 5 options and do your rough work here, or if some students may want, you need to write down the conclusion, the premises, assumptions here, and then you can find out what your answer should be, what the prediction should be. Another thing we did was the common wrong options. Remember, something that is not in the passage or not in the scope of the passage is totally wrong. If any option mentions anything that is not related to the argument at all, it would be irrelevant, it would be wrong. And the second wrong option that is very commonly used are extreme answer choices. Extreme answer choices using words like never or all or every. Unless it is mentioned or implied in the argument itself, usually these options are going to be wrong. So that is a reminder for you. So let's go ahead and start the first kind of question, which is find a flaw. Now it's essentially like a weakening question, because basically you're finding a flaw. Indirectly you're weakening, but it's not hypothetical. If you remember, weakening questions always have this phrase, if true. Right? So remember, in finding flaw questions, the options will not be hypothetical, they'll be actual. For example, the assumptions are wrong. Alright, this could be one of your answers in a simple form, that the assumption is wrong, or the analogy that has been implied is wrong, or some statistics are missing. So these kind of options which are not fictional, these would be your answer choices in finding a flaw kind of question. And what basically you have to do is you have to attack the assumptions here as well. Remember, I told you, whenever you have an argument, you have the premise, you have the conclusion, you have the assumptions. If you go with the assumptions, what you're doing is you are strengthening the argument. If you go against the assumptions, you are weakening it. And since it's essentially like the weakening question, what you do have to do is you have to attack the assumptions. So let's go ahead and solve one question. The question stem is, which of the following, if true, would point to a possible flaw in the city's plan? Now the argument states, a city plans to attract new citizens with new housing and new facilities such as parks, recreation centers and libraries. One component of the city's plan is to require that builders seeking permission to build this new housing provide these additional facilities at no price to the city. So according to the scratch work that I discussed, let's write down our 5 options here. We know that what the city is doing is it has a plan to attract new citizens, and the plan is through better housing and through better facilities. But what they're saying is one component of the city's plan is to require that builders seeking permission to build the new housing provide these extra facilities at no price to the city. Means indirectly we are saying that these extra facilities should be free of cost. So what our answer should do is find a flaw with this entire plan. So let's go through option number A. A says builders would pass along their prices to the buyer, thereby raising the price of housing units beyond the ability of likely purchasers to afford them. Now tell me, is this weakening our argument? Yes, it is weakening. And is it finding a flaw in the argument? Yes, it is. So that means A can be the answer. Let's go to B. B says light, non-polluting industries have located in the area, offering more jobs and better paying jobs than do the more established industries in the area. Now, is it weakening? No. And is it highlighting a flaw in the argument? No, because this is totally irrelevant to the argument. That means B cannot be the answer. Now, C option says other towns and cities nearby have yet to embark on any comparable plans to attract new citizens. Now remember, it's talking about other towns and cities, so definitely this one is also irrelevant. You can cross out C. D says most builders see the extra expense of providing municipal facilities as simply one of the many prices of doing business. Now, this is not weakening or finding out a flaw definitely, because it is not doing anything to go against this plan. So that means D is also crossed out. Coming to E, it says studies show that purchasers of new houses, especially first-time buyers, rank recreational resources as an important factor in deciding to buy a particular house. Now this is not going to weaken at all, because we are not talking about the price at all, which is the main point of the argument. We have to talk about these facilities being passed on to the consumers at no extra price. So that means E is also irrelevant. Thus our answer is going to be option A. Let's do another question. The question says, which of the following statements, if true, provides the best evidence that the mayor's reasoning is flawed? Now, a certain mayor has proposed a fee of $5 per day on private vehicles entering the city, claiming that the fee will alleviate the city's traffic congestion. The mayor reasons that since the fee will exceed the price of round-trip bus fare from many nearby points, many people will switch from using their cars to using the bus. Now let's draw the scratch paper over here. And what is there in the argument is that the mayor has proposed a plan, that is, a fee will be imposed on private vehicles entering the city, and that fee will help to reduce the traffic problems because of this fine or this fee. What is the reasoning that the mayor is giving is that fee will exceed price of round-trip bus fare. Now this fee will be more than the bus fare from many nearby points, so many people will switch from using their cars to using the bus. Therefore, people who are actually using cars will now switch to using the bus transport. So we have to find a flaw in this argument. Let's go to option A. It says projected increases in the price of gasoline will increase the price of taking a private vehicle into the city. Now this information may weaken it, may strengthen it, but it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the fee of $5 which is being levied. So that means A is totally irrelevant. B says The price of parking fees already makes it considerably more expensive for most people to take a private vehicle into the city than to take a bus. Now this may be the answer because it's giving a reason why the extra $5 per day is not going to hurt the private vehicles, because the people who drive these private vehicles are already paying a fee. That means the extra parking fees has not been a deterrent for them. It is not being a factor that is forcing them to take the bus. So this may be the answer. C says, most of the people currently riding the bus do not own private vehicles. Now remember, we are not concerned with people who are already riding the bus. We are concerned with people who are owning private vehicles. So C is totally irrelevant again. D says, many commuters opposing the mayor's plan have indicated that they would rather endure traffic congestion than pay a $5 per day fee. Now this is again talking about what commuters are doing. They're opposing the plan and they would prefer to endure traffic congestion, means that they would still prefer their private vehicles. But this is not finding a flaw in the mayor's plan, so this is out of scope. And finally, let's go to option E. It says, during the average work day, private vehicles owned and operated by people living within the city account for 20% of the city's traffic congestion. Now, this value over here, that does not help us to find a flaw. This value can be 50%, this value can be 70%, or this value can be 10%. It is not related, and that is why E option is also irrelevant. Our answer is going to be B. The next type of question is bold-faced questions. What happens is you get an argument, two phrases in the argument are written in bold. You have to show what is the relationship between both of them. Some of my students find these questions very easy while some find it tough. Let's find out what these questions actually mean. What you have to do is determine first what the two phrases mean. So this is something that you have to do on your scratch paper. Here you have your question number. You have your 5 options here. What you have to do is try to do this for every question also. Mention 1 and 2 for the two phrases, and you must write down what the two phrases actually mean. Because unless you will understand it completely, all the options are going to sound very confusing to you. Because only when you have a clear idea of what the statement 1 or the phrase 1 and phrase 2 are doing, only then you'll be able to use the next step, which is process of elimination. So that is what I want to tell you, that you need a lot of clarity. Thus it is better to use the scratch paper. This is very important, especially in bold-faced kind of questions. So let's go ahead and do this one. So for the benefit of seeing it visually in a better way, I have put the bold faces in yellow color. So let me put down my options here, A, B, C, D, E. And you can recognize this question by seeing it itself. You don't need to read, but still let's go ahead and read. In the astronomer's argument, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles? So there are two portions. Let's put 1 and 2. Astronomer says, observations of the SL comet on its collision course with Pluto showed that comet was fragmented before entering the Pluto's atmosphere in 94. That means what it is saying is the comet was fragmented before entering the atmosphere. Let's say before entering Pluto's atmosphere. But they did not show how big those fragments were. Hoping to gain some indication of the fragment size, astronomers studied spectrographic analysis of the outer atmosphere. So to look at the size of these fragments, some analysis was carried out. Now these analyses revealed unprecedented traces of sulfur after the fragment's entry. The fragments themselves almost certainly contained no sulfur, but many astronomers believe that the cloud layer below Pluto's outer atmosphere does contain sulfur. So what the first statement is actually telling us, that since they found sulfur in these fragments after the fragment's entry, what they're saying is that fragments did not contain any sulfur, but astronomers believe that the cloud layer, it contains sulfur. And remember, this is what the astronomers believed. It's mentioned directly, but many astronomers believe. Then it says, since sulfur would have seeped into the outer atmosphere, if comet fragments had penetrated this cloud layer, it is likely that some of the fragments were at least large enough to have passed through Pluto's outer atmosphere without being burned up. Now what is this is? This is a thesis, again given by the astronomers. Right? So you can go ahead if you want. I understand this is not a very easy question. If you want, you can go ahead and pause this video right here, right now, and you can go through the question once again, have a look at all the scratch work that I've done till now, and then you can come back and let's do the options one by one. Right? So basically what we have is that the first and the second phrases are both pointing in the same direction. They are not opposing each other. The first one is talking about an astronomer's belief that since the fragments did not have any sulfur, that means the cloudy layer must be having sulfur, and if this is true, that the second thing is supposed to be the main conclusion of the astronomers. Right? And that is the conclusion, that some of the fragments were at least large enough to have passed through Pluto's outer atmosphere. Now remember, why were we doing this analysis? Was to find out how big those fragments were, and since now we have predicted that they were at least large enough, that means this is the conclusion of the entire argument. So let's go ahead and look at option A. The first presents a circumstance for which astronomer offers an explanation. The second is part of an explanation. Now this word here, we are not giving any explanation, and that is why A is incorrect. Usually in these kind of questions, one word is enough to render the entire option wrong. The second one, the first acknowledges a consideration that weighs against the conclusion of the argument. The second is that conclusion. Remember, I told you 1 and 2 are both in the same direction. This word against is making this option wrong. C says the first acknowledges a consideration that weighs against the conclusion. Now as soon as you read this, you know this option is also wrong. D says the first provides evidence in support of the conclusion of the argument. The second acknowledges a consideration that weighs against that conclusion. Again, against is wrong. Let's go to E. E says the first is a judgment advanced in support of the conclusion of the argument. The second is that conclusion. This is absolutely correct and it's matching with our answer. That means our answer is E. So what did we learn here is that it's very important to keep your scratch work. If you had not written what statement, what phrase 1 and phrase 2 have to show, you will be very confused. The second is that one word is enough to make these options wrong. If you see explanation, against, you should be able to find these words and eliminate the options. Let's try another question. This one is on genetic engineering. So the question says, in the argument given, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles? So let me put down my options here. Okay, plant scientists have used gene therapy on seeds to produce crop plants that are highly resistant to insect damage. Unfortunately. So as soon as you read unfortunately means it's something negative. The seeds themselves are quite expensive, means the seeds are very expensive and the plants need more fertilizer and water to grow well, and these plants need more of water and they need more of fertilizer to grow well. Alright, so what is basically this whole information telling us is some negative effect of gene therapy. Let's go to second statement. Thus, for most farmers, the savings on pesticides would not compensate for the higher seed prices and the price of additional fertilizer. Now, you see, there's a trigger for you. However, means in spite of all these, since consumer demand for grains, fruits and vegetables grown without the use of pesticides continues to rise, means the demand for especially these kind of plants, right, that need less of pesticides on them, is rising. The use of genetically engineered seeds of this kind is likely to become widespread. So what is this? This is basically a prediction that in spite of all these negative factors, since the demand is increasing, that means the use of such plants or such seeds is likely to become widespread. So let's go to the options one by one. A says the first supplies a context for the argument, the second is the argument's main conclusion. Now, that may be correct, but it's not a context for the argument. And the second is not the argument's main conclusion. Right? The conclusion is still not accurately given. So let's leave out option A for now. B says the first introduces a development that the argument predicts will have a certain outcome. Now remember, the prediction was done for the second phrase. The second is a state of affairs that the argument denies will be part of that outcome. Actually, the argument is saying that seeds of this kind, the use of such seeds will become widespread. That means the argument is not denying it, and the first statement was not a prediction. We know B is incorrect. C says the first presents a development that the argument predicts will have a certain outcome. The second acknowledges a consideration that weighs against that prediction. Now remember over here, although we cancelled out this option B because of the word predicts, but the major reason was this word denies. Let's look at option C. It says the first presents a development. Yes, we do have a development that the argument predicts will have a certain outcome. Right? So this one is going to be the development. The second acknowledges a consideration that weighs against that prediction. And what is the consideration? That the demand for such seeds is going up. That means even C can be the answer. D says the first provides evidence to support a prediction. Now remember, the prediction that we were making is opposite to the first phrase. That means the word support is incorrect. So we cross out D. E says the first and the second each provide evidence to support the argument's main conclusion. Now remember, the first and the second one are totally opposite of each other. First is saying that there is no use of planting such seeds. Second one is saying the demand is increasing, so the use will become widespread. So that means E is also incorrect. Now between A and C, let's go ahead and understand the wording again. A says the first supplies a context for the argument. The second is the argument's main conclusion. Now remember, I told you that the argument has still not made a conclusion, and if there is a conclusion, it would be this statement. That means A is also dropped out. C is the correct answer. Now what all information you needed in this argument was definitely the meaning of the two phrases. You needed that with a lot of clarity. You needed to know what is the conclusion of the argument, because using this word conclusion, they have used a lot of options. And the third thing, how to eliminate the option, that was very important. The process of elimination. So again, for process of elimination, you need to have clarity regarding the phrases. You need to have your scratch work in order. Let's go to the next type of question, which is inference kind of question. Now, a few things about inferences: that first of all, inference is always unstated. It is never mentioned. It must be 100% true, and it is not just a random guess. Right? The difference between inference and assumption is that both of them are correct, but assumption is very important for the conclusion to be correct, while inference is not so important. That means without the inference also, the argument is still correct. It still holds true. Whereas if you remove these assumptions, you weaken or you attack these assumptions, the whole conclusion is going to go weak. The whole argument will collapse or it will break down. And the second important thing, the second main important difference is that assumption is taken from the author's point of view, the author's or the argument's point of view. Right? Whereas inference, we as readers take the inference. right? It is from the reader's point of view. So remember one thing, inference is not important for the conclusion to be correct, whereas assumption is. It's an important building block. It's one of the three parts of an argument apart from conclusion and premise. Inference is an extra information, what we can deduce from the argument. For example, you have an argument here, there are only white chairs in the hall. What all can you infer from that? You can infer, can you say that there is a hall? No, you can't say there is a hall because it's mentioned already. That would not be an inference because it's already stated. What would be an inference is that there are no red chairs in the hall, or there are no yellow chairs in the hall, there are no green chairs, there are no black chairs. How do we know that we are 100% sure? Because of this word only. Right, so all this information is not mentioned, but at the same time it is 100% correct and it is unstated and it's not a random guess. Another example, for example, I tell you that 80% of the class consists of males. Now, even without mentioning, we know that 20% of the class will consist of females. Now, what this we have derived is an inference. It was not stated, yet it is 100% correct. And it's not a guess, it's 100% correct. So let's do one question. Question says, which one of the following inferences is most supported by the passage? We have the options in front of us, A, B, C, D, E. Let's go through the argument. Mineral M has long been a favorite among health food enthusiasts. In a recent large study, those who took large amounts of mineral M, so let's say large amounts of mineral M, daily for 2 years showed on an average 50% lower risk of heart disease than did members of a control group. Researchers corrected for differences in relevant health habits. Means there's no other factor like health habits which is influencing the results. So that means taking this mineral M for 2 years actually did help these people to reduce their heart disease 50%. Right, so let's go through the options and find out what is the inference. First says, taking large amounts of vitamins is probably worth risking the side effects. We do not have such information. It's not totally based. It's not totally correct. B says, those who take larger doses of mineral M daily for the next 2 years will exhibit an average increase in the likelihood of avoiding disease. This is totally correct because researchers have already corrected for differences in relevant health habits such as diet. That means if they follow the plan once again for the next 2 years, the results are going to be replicated. So let's keep B for now. C says, Lee, who has taken large amounts of mineral M daily for the past 2 years, has a 40% lower risk. Now this information we cannot tell because remember over here we had information on average. Now average does not mean that every person of that group will have a 50% lower risk. Some may have a 70% lower risk while some may have a 30% lower risk. But we cannot be sure that Lee has a 40% lower risk, so C is obviously wrong. D says, taking large amounts of mineral M daily over the course of one's adult life should be recommended to most adults. Now we do not have any information of the entire adult life, so D is also out of scope, just like C. E says, health food enthusiasts are probably correct in believing that large daily doses of multiple vitamins promote good health. Now again, this is a very vague option. It's not 100% true. It looks more like a guess, so that means our answer is going to be B. Next question. Again, if the shipping clerk's statements are true, which of the following must also be true? So let's draw the options here. We have the options here. Now the clerk says the 5 specially ordered shipments sent out last week was sent on Thursday. Right, 5 special shipments last week was sent on a Thursday, and plus last week all of the shipments that were sent on Friday consisted entirely of building supplies. and the shipping department then closed for the weekend. That means there was no shipping done after Friday. Now 4 shipments were sent to T Corp last week, only 3 of which consisted of building supplies. That means there is 3 of them were building supplies. That means one of them is related to something else. So let's go through option A. At least one of the shipments sent to T Corp last week was specially ordered. Now we cannot be 100% sure of this because we do not know whether that extra special shipment was given to T Corp or to some other company. So we are not 100% sure. A cannot be the answer. B says at least one of last week's specially ordered shipments did not consist of building supplies. Again, we do not have this information that whether these special shipments were they also having some building supplies or not. So that means B also cannot be the answer. C says at least one of the shipments sent to T Corp was not sent out on Thursday of last week. Again, we do not have any information because we know 4 shipments were sent to T Corp last week, only 3 of which consisted of building supplies. Now those building supplies could have been shipped out on Monday as well, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday even, and Friday will definitely on Friday everything consisted only of building supplies. So that means C is also incorrect because we do not have information of not sent out on Thursday of last week. D says at least one of the shipments that was sent out on Friday of last week was sent to T Corp. Again, we do not have information whether T Corp got the shipment of these building supplies or not. E says at least one of the shipments sent to T Corp last week was sent out before Friday. This is 100% correct. Why? Because 4 shipments were sent to T Corp last week and all of the shipments that were sent on Friday had only building supplies. And for T Corp, only 3 were having building supplies. So what this means is if there is an additional 4th shipment to T Corp, it must have shipped before Friday. So that means E option is correct. Again, this is a little confusing question. I would recommend for this question as well that you should pause the video and try to work out the scratch work on your own, and then that would be very easy. You'll be able to find out that E is the answer very easily. Now the last type of question that we have in front of us is when you have to complete a passage. You are given an entire argument and you have to finish or you have to complete the last line of the argument, and you have 5 options for that. What you basically have to do is understand what the argument is trying to assert. You cannot leave out portions of the argument and then try to find out. You have to read the argument carefully. Next thing, predict how the argument should end. If you want, you can put this down on your scratch paper, otherwise you can keep it in your mind. And again, like bold-faced questions, clarity should be 100%. You should be 100% clear. If you think you're not clear, don't go to the options. Read and work the argument once again till you're absolutely clear. Otherwise, you should not go to the options. The options are going to confuse you. So let's go through this question. It says, which of the following most logically completes the argument below? Again, these kind of questions you'll be able to recognize just by the way they look. So the argument says the river farmers are currently deciding between planting winter wheat this fall or spring wheat next spring. Alright, so we have this information: winter wheat this fall or spring wheat next spring. Right, let me put fall here and this is spring. Right, so winter wheat this fall or spring wheat next spring. Now winter wheat and spring wheat are usually about equally profitable, so anything about profits, both of them are equally profitable. Because of new restrictions on the use of river water, per acre yields for winter wheat, though not for spring wheat, would be much lower. Means the yields would be lower for the winter wheat. Therefore, planting spring wheat will be more profitable than planting winter wheat since. Now remember, they are about equally profitable means if the yield is same. But you know that the yield is going to reduce when the winter wheat is applied. That means that the spring wheat is more profitable. That is what we have to prove. So let's go to the options. First says The smaller than average size of a winter wheat harvest this year due to the low yield would not be compensated for by higher winter wheat prices. So this is definitely giving us a reason why spring wheat would be more profitable, because there will be no compensation if you plant winter wheat. So that means A can be one of our answers. B says new crops of spring wheat must be planted earlier than the time at which standing crops of winter wheat are ready to be harvested. Now this is talking about overlapping time. It's not related to profits at all, so B is irrelevant. C says the spring wheat that farmers in the Davison River region plant is well adapted to the soil of the region. Now we are not talking about how well adapted it is, so C is incorrect. D says spring wheat has uses that are different from those of winter wheat. Again, because of that we can't talk about profitability. And E says planting spring wheat is more profitable than planting certain other crops such as rye. Now we are not talking about other crops, that would be totally irrelevant. That means our answer is A. Let's do one more question before we go ahead and end the video. Question is, which of the following most logically completes the argument? Again, let's put down our 5 options. Y and Z are 2 corporations that employ large numbers of full-time workers who are paid by the hour. Right, so we have Y and we have Z. Publicly available records indicate that Y employs the same number of such hourly wage workers as Z does, but spends a far higher total sum per year on wages. That means the annual wages are higher in Y as compared to Z, but the number of hourly workers is equal to the number of hourly workers in Z. So it's very easy to find out a conclusion over here. It says therefore hourly wages must be higher on average at Y than at Z, since, now this we can easily figure it out, if the total amount that is given in wages is more in Y and Z, as compared to Z, and if the number of workers is the same, that means Y is giving more wages per person. So option A says Z spends a higher total sum per year than Y does to provide its hourly wage workers with benefits other than wages. Now it's totally irrelevant because we are only talking about wages. B says the work performed by hourly wage workers at Z does not require a significantly higher level of skill. Now remember, this is wrong because the word is incorrect. We are not talking about skill at all. C says the proportion of all company employees who are hourly wage workers is, so I think there's something missing over here, so it's something is significantly greater at Y than it is for Z. Right? So let me correct this. But again, the percentage is not relevant. Let's go to D. D says overtime work which is paid at a substantially higher rate than work done during the regular week is rare at both Y and Z. Now this may be correct because what it is doing is it's eliminating other factors that may bring about an imbalance in this relation, in this equation of Y paying more in terms of annual wages. E says the highest hourly wages paid at Y are higher than the highest hourly wages paid at Z. Now this could help us, but only if we know how many number of people get the highest wages in both Y and Z. So this is an incomplete option. Actually our answer is D, because this is giving us information. The conclusion is already made that hourly wages must be higher on average at Y than at Z. Since now over here what we basically have to say is that there is no other factor or there is no other external influence that can again bring a change in this relation. So again, when you go through the video once again, you must pause on each question before I start solving, and then you should see are you able to reach the answer or not. Right? So that's all in this video for critical reasoning. There's another video coming up. And so far, thank you so much for watching the video. Again, if you want more information, you can always visit our website perfect-scores.com. You can visit our page and like us at facebook.com/perfectscores, and you can mail us at perfectscores89@gmail.com. So what all we did in this video is critical reasoning part 2. What we did was how to find a flaw in the argument. We discussed about bold-faced questions. Right, we did something about inference-based questions. We did complete the passage questions. Right, revising everything on a quick note, what we did for finding a flaw is that we know it's equal to finding a weakening point. Basically, we have to go and attack the assumption. In boldface, the important thing to remember is that you must have information on both the phrases, both the bold phrases, right there on your scratch paper. Only then you'll be able to follow the process of elimination carefully. For inference, we remembered two things: that inferences have to be 100% correct, and they are not very important to the conclusion. It is not going to be a guess. And for complete the passage, again, what we remembered was that you need to understand the passage very well. Only then you will be able to eliminate the options, and for this also you need to have a lot of mental clarity. So that's all for this video today. Thank you so much.